We are living through a strange moment in history, a moment where appearances matter more than reality and where confidence is often confused for stability. What you see on screens every day does not match what is happening behind closed doors, and that gap is widening faster than most people realize. Tonight's conversation is not comfortable, but it is necessary because what is being hidden now will shape the next decade. If you stay with me until the end, you will understand why so many people feel lost and why the silence we are seeing from men is not accidental. Before we go any further, make sure you like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell and select all so you get every Angry Guy video the moment it is released. That small action helps keep these conversations alive and uncensored. Also, check out Angry's Crypto Academy, which is linked in the description below. The Academy is where I teach people how to protect and safeguard their assets and grow their wealth, how to buy, sell, and trade crypto responsibly, and how to think long term in a world that is becoming increasingly unstable. If you care about your future and your independence, go check it out now. And if you are enjoying these Angry Guy videos and want to show support, you can buy me a Red Bull using the link in the description. That support helps keep the lights on and the truth flowing. Now, let us talk honestly. There is a quiet crisis unfolding right now that most people do not want to acknowledge. It is not being discussed seriously in mainstream conversations. And when it is mentioned, it is often framed as bad luck or temporary hardship, but it is neither of those things. What we are seeing is the result of years of messaging, incentives, and cultural conditioning finally colliding with economic reality. Many women today are not thriving, even though they are expected to present the image that everything is fine. The pressure to appear successful, independent, and unaffected has created a situation where survival itself is being performed rather than lived. Every single day, social media is filled with videos of women explaining that rent is too high, groceries cost too much, transportation is expensive, and basic living expenses are overwhelming. These are not isolated stories. These are full time workers, often with degrees, often doing everything they were told would lead to security, still finding themselves one emergency away from collapse. Yet in the very next post, many of these same individuals are expected to project strength, confidence, and complete self sufficiency. That contradiction is exhausting and it is unsustainable. For decades, the message was clear and repeated endlessly. You do not need anyone. You can do everything on your own. You should focus on career first, relationships later, if at all. Dependence was framed as weakness, cooperation was reframed as control, and traditional partnerships were portrayed as unnecessary or even harmful. Many believed this, not because they were foolish, but because the message was delivered by institutions, educators, media figures, and cultural leaders who claimed authority. Now we are watching the consequences unfold in real time. The job market is shifting rapidly, and it is doing so without apology. Automation, artificial intelligence, and process optimization are replacing roles that once provided stability. Many of the positions being affected are administrative, clerical, support based, or task oriented roles that can be replicated by software at a fraction of the cost. This is not a judgment, it is an observation. The reality is that entire categories of work are being compressed or eliminated, and people who built their lives around those paths are now scrambling to adapt. At the same time, there is a refusal to admit vulnerability. There is a cultural expectation that asking for help means failure, especially after years of declaring independence as a badge of honor. So instead of recalibrating, many double down on appearances. Everything is fine. No one is needed. The system is not broken. The problem must be external. This mindset prevents honest assessment. And without honest assessment, there can be no meaningful change. Another layer of this issue is financial behavior. For a long time, many women benefited from a system where men were expected to provide support without question. This support was not always formal or transactional. It showed up in dates, gifts, assistance, shared expenses, and emotional labor that carried financial weight. Over time, this became normalized to the point where it was no longer recognized as support, it was simply assumed. When that assumption disappears, the shock is severe. What we are witnessing now is the collapse of unspoken expectations. Many men have quietly stepped back. They are no longer offering resources, time, or energy without reciprocity. They are no longer participating in systems that feel one sided or unappreciated. This shift did not happen overnight, and it did not happen without reason. It happened after years of being told they were unnecessary, replaceable, or inherently flawed. Eventually, people listen. Men, on average, are able to reduce their needs quickly when circumstances demand it. This is not about comfort or luxury. It is about adaptability. Many men are willing to live simply, work quietly, and disengage from systems that no longer reward their effort. This ability to downshift is not glamorous, but it is effective. It allows for survival with fewer inputs, fewer expectations, and fewer dependencies. Women, on the other hand, have often been encouraged to associate success with lifestyle rather than sustainability. Housing, aesthetics, experiences, and social validation became part of identity rather than optional layers. When income no longer supports that structure, the emotional impact is significant. It feels like failure, even when it is not. And because pride has been reinforced for so long, admitting the struggle feels impossible. This is where the real problem emerges. When people cannot admit reality, they cannot adjust to it. Instead of rebuilding differently, they cling to narratives that no longer work. The idea that everything should be provided, that support is owed, or that independence means never needing anyone becomes a trap rather than a goal. The refusal to acknowledge interdependence leads to isolation, not strength. Partnerships were never meant to be about superiority or service, they were meant to be about balance, different strengths covering different weaknesses, shared burdens reducing individual strain. When that model was dismissed, the replacement was not true independence, but hidden dependence, dependence on systems, markets, strangers, and attention instead of on a committed partner. As men stepped away, many found something they had not experienced before: quiet, peace, control over their time and resources. They stopped chasing validation and started focusing inward. They invested in skills, health, and personal stability. They learned to be content with less external approval. Once someone reaches that state, it is very difficult to convince them to return to chaos. Now, there is confusion. Why are men not approaching anymore? Why are relationships declining? Why is commitment rare? The answers are uncomfortable, so they are often avoided. It is easier to blame economics alone, or technology, or culture in general, rather than acknowledging personal and collective choices. This is not about assigning hatred or blame, it is about accountability. When a generation is told that it does not need cooperation, it should not be surprised when cooperation disappears. When people are told they are replaceable, they should not be shocked when others stop trying to earn approval. When expectations are removed, behavior changes. Many women today are exhausted, not because they are weak, but because they are carrying a structure that was never designed to last on its own. They were told to be everything, to do everything, and to need nothing. That is not empowerment. That is isolation disguised as strength. At the same time, there are still voices insisting that nothing needs to change, that the problem is simply men refusing to give, refusing to try, refusing to step up. But step up to what exactly? To a system that dismissed them, to expectations that offer no appreciation, to roles that only exist when convenient. That is not partnership, and people are waking up to that reality. What we are seeing now is not a sudden collapse, it is a delayed response. Years of choices finally meeting consequences, years of messaging finally meeting reality. And reality does not negotiate. The hardest part of this moment is that admitting the truth requires humility. It requires saying, maybe we were wrong about some things. Maybe independence was misunderstood. Maybe cooperation was undervalued. Maybe strength includes knowing when you need support. For many, that admission feels like surrender. But in truth, it is the first step toward rebuilding something that actually works. Hey guys, in a world pushing you to own nothing and be happy, crypto is your key to survival. Join Angry's Crypto Academy to master buying, selling, and trading crypto. Make huge profits and safeguard your wealth. Plus, discover the one crypto virtually no one is talking about, poised to create new millionaires in the upcoming bull run. The link is in the description of the video below. Go check it out now. Men who walked away did not do so out of anger alone. Many did so out of exhaustion. They tried, they adapted, they compromised, and eventually they concluded that peace was better than performance. Once peace becomes the priority, everything else becomes optional. To understand where we are going, we need to slow down and look carefully at how we arrived here, because this did not happen suddenly and it did not happen by accident. For years, incentives were misaligned, and when incentives are misaligned long enough, behavior follows them even when the outcome is destructive. Society encouraged people to prioritize individual validation over shared responsibility, short term affirmation over long term stability, and public approval over private accountability. Those choices felt good in the moment, but they were never designed to hold weight over time. One of the most damaging ideas that took root was the belief that needing someone else was inherently a weakness. That message sounds empowering on the surface, but in practice, it erodes trust and cooperation. Human beings are not designed to operate in isolation, and pretending otherwise creates stress that never fully goes away. When people are told they should be able to do everything alone, they internalize failure whenever they struggle, even when the struggle is completely normal. This is especially visible now as living costs continue to rise while wages lag behind. Housing, food, transportation, healthcare, and education have all increased faster than income for most people. This is not a matter of opinion, it is a measurable reality. When a single income is expected to support a lifestyle that once required two, something has to give. Either expectations adjust or pressure builds until something breaks. What we are seeing is that expectations did not adjust. Instead, people were encouraged to maintain appearances at all costs. Social media amplified this problem by rewarding presentation rather than stability. The image of success became more important than the substance of it. People learned how to look independent long before they learned how to be secure. At the same time, men were told repeatedly that their traditional contributions were outdated or unnecessary. Providing, protecting, leading, and building were reframed as control or obligation rather than value. Many men internalized this message and stepped back, not out of spite, but out of confusion. If what they offered was no longer wanted, then the logical response was to stop offering it. What is rarely discussed is how quiet this withdrawal was. There was no dramatic announcement, no collective statement. Men simply disengaged. They stopped approaching. They stopped investing emotionally and financially without clear mutual benefit. They stopped chasing approval from systems that dismissed them. And because this happened gradually, many did not notice until the absence became impossible to ignore. Now there is a growing sense of frustration and disbelief. How did things get so hard? Why does everything feel unstable? Why does independence feel so heavy? These questions are valid, but they require honest answers. Independence without cooperation is not freedom, it is exposure. It means absorbing every shock alone, every expense alone, every failure alone. That is not strength, that is vulnerability without support. There's also a generational component to this shift. Many people were raised with the expectation that life would improve steadily if they followed the rules. Get educated, work hard, be self sufficient. The reality they are facing now does not match that promise. Jobs feel insecure. Housing feels unreachable. Relationships feel transactional or absent. When expectations and reality diverge this sharply, resentment builds. Some people respond to this resentment by blaming external forces exclusively: the economy, technology, institutions. While those factors matter, they are not the whole story. Personal choices, cultural narratives, and collective behavior all play a role. Ignoring that complexity leads to solutions that never address the root problem. Another difficult truth is that many women were not prepared for a world where support was conditional rather than assumed. When support is framed as something owed, gratitude disappears. When gratitude disappears, relationships erode. Men noticed this long before the broader conversation caught up. Being treated as an expendable resource rather than a valued partner creates emotional fatigue that does not go away with time. As men pulled back, many women attempted to compensate by leaning harder into self affirmation, declaring strength louder, projecting confidence more aggressively. But affirmation without foundation is fragile. It requires constant reinforcement, and when reality contradicts it, the emotional cost is severe. This is why we are seeing so many public breakdowns alongside private denial. What makes this moment particularly challenging is that admitting the need for change feels like losing face. After years of declaring independence as the ultimate goal, acknowledging the value of partnership feels like contradiction. But growth often requires contradiction. It requires the updating beliefs based on new information. Refusing to do that leads to stagnation. Men, for their part, have discovered that solitude is not the punishment they were told it would be. Many have learned to manage their needs efficiently, focus on personal goals, and reduce exposure to unnecessary stress. This does not mean they are happier in every sense, but they are calmer. Calm is powerful. Once someone experiences calm, they become selective about what disrupts it. This is why appeals for men to return to old dynamics are largely ineffective. You cannot convince someone to give up peace for chaos. You cannot shame someone into sacrificing stability for obligation. Those methods only work when people believe they have no alternatives. Men discovered alternatives, and that discovery changed everything. The broader implication of this shift goes beyond relationships. It affects birth rates, economic participation, housing markets, and social cohesion. When large numbers of people disengage from traditional paths, systems built around those paths begin to strain. This is not theoretical, it is happening now. Yet, instead of addressing the structural and cultural causes, much of the conversation focuses on surface level symptoms: dating apps, social media trends, temporary economic relief. These are distractions. They do not address the underlying misalignment between expectations and reality. The core issue is that many people were encouraged to pursue autonomy without resilience. Autonomy without resilience is brittle. It looks strong until pressure is applied. Resilience comes from adaptability, cooperation, and honest self assessment. Those qualities were not emphasized. Image was emphasized instead. Another overlooked factor is how language shaped perception. Words like empowerment and independence were used without clear definitions. Empowerment became synonymous with separation rather than capability. Independence became synonymous with isolation rather than self reliance within a community. Over time, these distortions hardened into beliefs. Rebuilding from this point requires redefining those concepts. True empowerment means having the skills and relationships to navigate hardship. True independence means being able to choose cooperation without desperation. These are not opposites, they support each other. For many women, this redefinition is painful because it challenges identity. Identity built on opposition rather than integration is difficult to sustain, but avoiding that pain only prolongs the crisis. Growth requires discomfort. There is no path around it. Men are not returning because they are being asked to return to something that no longer makes sense. The conditions have not changed. The expectations remain one sided. The appreciation remains conditional. Without meaningful change, there is no incentive to re engage. This is not a declaration of finality, it is a description of reality. Reality can change, but only when acknowledged. Pretending that nothing needs to shift will only deepen the divide. Cooperation cannot be demanded, it must be mutually beneficial. As economic pressures increase, the illusion of effortless independence will continue to crack. This is not cause for celebration or condemnation. It is simply a turning point. How people respond to this moment will determine whether the future is built on resentment or realism. Some will choose realism. They will reassess priorities. They will seek balanced partnerships. They will trade image for stability. Others will cling to narratives that no longer serve them and blame everyone but themselves when those narratives fail. Both paths are available. Only one leads to sustainability. The men who stepped away did so quietly, but their absence is loud. It forces questions that were long avoided. It exposes assumptions that went unexamined. It reveals how much of modern life depended on unspoken cooperation that was taken for granted. Rebuilding always begins with honesty, and honesty requires naming what has been avoided for a long time. The social contract that once existed between men and women was never perfect, but it was functional because it acknowledged reality rather than fantasy. Each side brought something tangible to the table, and each side benefited in ways that were understood, even if they were not always spoken aloud. When that contract was dismantled without a viable replacement, the system did not become fairer or freer. It became unstable. For years, people were encouraged to believe that emotional fulfillment, financial security, and personal identity could all be achieved independently and simultaneously. That promise ignored the basic limits of time, energy, and resources. It also ignored how deeply interconnected human progress has always been. No society in history has thrived on isolation, and yet isolation was marketed as progress. As economic pressure increases, reality forces trade offs. You cannot have complete autonomy, maximum comfort, constant validation, and long term security all at once. Something has to give. In the past, those trade offs were shared. Two people combined effort, income, and resilience. Today, many are attempting to carry the full load alone while insisting that the load should not feel heavy. That contradiction is where frustration is born. This is why so many people feel exhausted, even when they are doing everything right on paper. They followed the advice, they worked, they studied, they stayed independent, yet they are still struggling. The problem is not individual failure. The problem is a system that promised outcomes it could not deliver. Men recognized this earlier than many expected. When told their role was obsolete, they took that statement at face value. They adjusted their behavior accordingly. They reduced participation in systems that demanded effort without offering respect or reciprocity. They stopped performing for approval that never arrived. Over time, this withdrawal became a new normal. Women, meanwhile, were encouraged to double down on self sufficiency as proof of worth. Any admission of difficulty was framed as weakness or betrayal of progress. This created an environment where struggling quietly was preferable to adjusting openly. But quiet struggle does not solve structural problems, it only delays them. The rise of emotional storytelling on social media is not accidental. When traditional support systems weaken, people turn to public validation. Sharing hardship becomes a way to release pressure without addressing the cause. The audience offers sympathy, but sympathy does not pay bills or build stability. It soothes, but it does not solve. What is missing from much of the conversation is accountability paired with compassion. Accountability without compassion becomes blame. Compassion without accountability becomes stagnation. Both are necessary. Acknowledging that some ideas were flawed does not negate progress, it refines it. Another uncomfortable reality is that many people underestimated how much they relied on informal support from men. This support was not always direct. It showed up in shared expenses, emergency help, emotional grounding, and problem solving. When that support disappears, the gap is immediately felt. Pretending it never mattered does not make the absence less painful. Men, on the other hand, learn to operate with fewer inputs because they had to. Many grew up with the expectation that support would be minimal or conditional. They adapted early. This adaptation became a strength in a world that now demands flexibility. When systems tighten, those who can reduce needs survive more easily than those who cannot. This difference in adaptation is not a value judgment, it is a result of conditioning. When people are told help will always be available, they build differently than those who are told to expect nothing. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but when circumstances change, one becomes more resilient than the other. The danger now is that instead of learning from this disparity, the response becomes defensive. Defensive narratives protect ego, but they block growth. Growth requires acknowledging what works and what does not, regardless of how it makes us feel. There is also a broader societal implication to consider. When large numbers of men disengage from dating, marriage, and family formation, the effects ripple outward, communities weaken, social trust declines, economic participation shifts. These are not moral arguments, they are demographic realities. Ignoring these realities because they conflict with preferred narratives does not stop them from unfolding. It only ensures that when consequences arrive, they feel sudden and unfair. Preparation requires foresight, not denial. What would recalibration actually look like? It would begin with redefining partnership as collaboration rather than entitlement. It would mean recognizing that mutual benefit is not selfish, it is sustainable. Relationships built on obligation fail under pressure. Relationships built on shared value adapt. For women, this may mean reassessing priorities and expectations, not lowering standards, but clarifying them, distinguishing between what is essential and what is cosmetic. Stability comes from structure, not appearance. Security comes from systems, not slogans. For men, it may mean remaining open to partnership without abandoning boundaries. Peace does not require permanent withdrawal. It requires discernment, choosing cooperation when it enhances life, not when it diminishes it. Neither side benefits from antagonism. Conflict consumes energy that could be used to build, yet conflict persists because it is easier than introspection. Blame offers relief without responsibility. Responsibility offers solutions but demands effort. And another layer to this discussion is the economic reality of specialization. In the past, partnerships allowed individuals to focus on complementary strengths. Today, everyone is expected to master everything: career, finances, emotional labor, domestic tasks, social presentation. This expectation is unrealistic and leads to burnout. Specialization is not oppression, it is efficiency. When people play to their strengths, outcomes improve. Rejecting specialization entirely leads to mediocrity across the board rather than excellence anywhere. The idea that needing someone else diminishes value is one of the most damaging beliefs of the modern era. Value is created through contribution, not isolation. Contribution often requires cooperation. This truth has not changed, no matter how uncomfortable it has become to admit. Men who walked away did not reject connection, they rejected imbalance. They rejected being valued only for what they could provide, while being dismissed for who they were. Until that imbalance is addressed, withdrawal will continue. Women who are struggling are not failing, they are confronting a reality that was delayed, not avoided. The sooner that reality is faced honestly, the sooner meaningful change can occur. Denial extends pain, acceptance shortens it. The future will not look like the past, but it does not have to look like collapse either. It can look like recalibration, a return to realism, a recognition that independence and interdependence are not enemies, but partners. This recalibration will not be led by slogans or trends. It will be led by individuals making quiet, practical decisions, adjusting expectations, building skills, seeking balance rather than validation. These decisions rarely go viral, but they shape lives. As more people make these adjustments, the noise will fade. The extremes will lose influence. The conversation will become less about blame and more about solutions. That transition will not be smooth, but it is necessary. Men will continue to prioritize peace. Women will continue to seek security. Those goals are not incompatible. They only appear so when framed through opposition rather than cooperation. The question now is whether society can move past performance and return to function, whether people are willing to trade image for stability, whether humility can replace defensiveness, whether partnership can be rebuilt on honesty rather than expectation. And these are not abstract questions. They are being answered every day through choices made quietly and individually. The aggregate of those choices will determine the shape of the future. And that brings us to the most important point of all. This moment is not a verdict, it is a crossroads. The path forward is still open, but only for those willing to see clearly, adjust honestly, and let go of narratives that no longer serve them. At every crossroads, people reveal what they truly value, not through what they say publicly, but through the decisions they make when no one is watching. Right now, the decisions being made quietly tell a story very different from the one being broadcast loudly. Behind the confident language and bold declarations, there is hesitation, uncertainty, and a growing awareness that the old assumptions no longer hold. This awareness is uncomfortable because it forces people to confront the limits of ideas they once embraced without question. One of the most persistent misunderstandings of the modern era is the belief that social progress means removing all forms of dependence. That belief ignores the reality that dependence is not inherently negative. The problem has never been dependence itself. The problem has been imbalance. When dependence flows in only one direction, resentment forms. When it flows both ways, trust is built. The goal was never to eliminate reliance on others, but to ensure that reliance was mutual and respectful. As this distinction was lost, relationships shifted from cooperation to negotiation. Every interaction became a transaction. What am I getting? What am I giving? Who owes whom? This mindset is corrosive over time because it replaces goodwill with a calculation. When goodwill disappears, people stop volunteering effort. They do only what is required and nothing more. Men recognized this shift early. Many felt that no matter how much they contributed, it was never enough. Expectations grew, appreciation shrank, and boundaries were treated as failures. Over time, the emotional return on investment diminished. When effort consistently yields criticism instead of respect, withdrawal becomes rational rather than emotional. Women, meanwhile, were encouraged to interpret boundaries as rejection rather than self preservation. This created a feedback loop where men withdrew further and women pushed harder for validation. Neither side felt understood. Both felt unheard. And instead of addressing the misalignment, the narrative hardened into opposition. Like the economic environment intensified this dynamic. Financial stress magnifies emotional stress. When money becomes tight, tolerance decreases. Small frustrations feel larger. Minor imbalances feel intolerable. In previous generations, shared responsibility softened these pressures. Two incomes, shared planning, and long term thinking created buffers. Today, many face these pressures alone while insisting that being alone is preferable. This insistence creates a kind of internal conflict. On one hand, there is pride and self reliance. On the other hand, there is exhaustion from carrying everything alone. Resolving that conflict requires humility. It requires acknowledging that independence does not mean isolation, it means having choice. Choice disappears when options shrink. Many people are discovering that their options are narrower than they expected. Jobs feel unstable. Housing feels out of reach. Relationships feel risky. When all options feel fragile, people cling to identity rather than adaptability. Identity feels solid even when circumstances are not. This is why narratives become so rigid during times of uncertainty. Letting go of a narrative feels like losing ground, but clinging to it when it no longer works creates deeper loss. Adaptation is not betrayal, it is survival. Men adapted by simplifying. They reduced expenses, they limited commitments, they focused on what they could control. This approach is not glamorous, but it is effective. It creates breathing room. Breathing room creates clarity. Clarity leads to peace. Women were often encouraged to adapt by projecting confidence rather than restructuring reality. Confidence is valuable, but it cannot substitute for stability. When confidence is unsupported by systems, it collapses under pressure. This is not a personal failing, it is a mismatch between strategy and circumstance. Another overlooked aspect of this shift is how it affects long term planning. When people do not trust systems or relationships, they stop planning far ahead. They live in shorter cycles, month to month, year to year. This short term focus limits growth, it prevents investment, it discourages commitment. Men who have stepped away from traditional paths often express this clearly. They are willing to work, but not to bind themselves to systems that feel unpredictable. They are willing to cooperate, but not to sacrifice autonomy for uncertainty. This stance is not hostile, it is cautious. Caution is often mistaken for apathy. In reality, it is the result of learning. People who have experienced imbalance become careful about repeating it. This caution will not disappear simply because it is criticized. It will only change when conditions change. For meaningful recalibration to occur, both sides must confront uncomfortable truths. Women must acknowledge that some forms of independence were oversold and undersupported. Men must acknowledge that complete withdrawal, while peaceful, limits certain forms of fulfillment. Neither admission invalidates past experience. Both open the door to better outcomes. The challenge is that admitting these truths requires letting go of absolutes. It requires moving away from all or nothing thinking, with independence versus dependence, strength versus vulnerability, freedom versus commitment. These are false binaries. Reality exists in the space between them. That middle space is where sustainable partnerships form. Partnerships based on choice rather than obligation, on contribution rather than entitlement, on respect rather than performance. These partnerships are quieter. They do not trend online. They do not generate outrage or applause. They simply work. The decline of public commitment does not mean the end of private cooperation. It means cooperation is becoming selective. People are more careful about where they invest. They are less willing to subsidize imbalance. This selectivity will shape future norms. As this process unfolds, there will be resistance. Those invested in old narratives will push back. They will frame recalibration as regression. They will label compromise as weakness. But labels do not change outcomes. Results do. Economic reality will continue to apply pressure regardless of ideology. Costs will continue to rise. Automation will continue to reshape work. Social systems will continue to strain. Adaptation will not be optional. The individuals who thrive in this environment will be those who can reassess without resentment, who can adjust without losing self respect, who can seek cooperation without surrendering boundaries. These qualities are not gendered, they are human. What we are witnessing now is not a collapse of values, it is a correction of illusions. Illusions that promised ease without effort, independence without cost, validation without contribution. These illusions were comforting, but they were never durable. Durability comes from alignment between belief and reality. When beliefs reflect reality, people can plan, they can build, they can cooperate effectively. When beliefs deny reality, stress accumulates until something gives. Many people sense this intuitively. They feel that something is off even if they cannot articulate it. They feel tired despite working hard. They feel isolated despite being connected digitally. They feel uncertain despite following prescribed paths. These feelings are signals, not failures. Listening to those signals requires slowing down and questioning assumptions. It requires asking not just what feels good to believe, but what actually works. This kind of reflection is rare in public discourse because it lacks spectacle, but it is essential for progress. Men walking away did not end cooperation, it exposed the cost of imbalance. Women struggling are not evidence of weakness, they are evidence of systems that failed to deliver on their promises. Recognizing both truths allows for movement forward rather than endless blame. The future will reward realism over rhetoric, practical skills over symbolic gestures, balanced expectations over rigid demands. Those who embrace this shift early will find stability sooner. Those who resist it will feel increasingly frustrated. This does not mean returning to outdated roles or abandoning progress. It means integrating lessons learned. It means acknowledging that progress without sustainability is not progress at all. It is delay. As more people internalize this, the noise will continue to fade. Extreme voices will lose influence as they fail to produce results. Quiet competence will become attractive again. Reliability will matter more than performance. This is how social norms actually change, not through declarations, but through demonstrated outcomes. When people see what works, they adopt it. When they see what fails, they move on, even if reluctantly. Solutions never arrive in dramatic fashion. They arrive quietly, often unnoticed, because they do not flatter the ego or reward performance. They require adjustment, patience, and a willingness to let go of stories that once felt empowering but now feel heavy. This is where many people struggle, not because the path forward is unclear, but because walking it means admitting that some beliefs no longer match reality. The first step toward rebuilding is redefining what strength actually means. Strength is not pretending everything is fine while quietly unraveling. Strength is not insisting on independence while relying on systems that are already under strain. Real strength is adaptability. It is the ability to revise plans, reallocate effort, and seek cooperation when it creates stability rather than conflict. For years, many were taught that asking for help was a sign of failure. That message was deeply internalized. Yet every functioning system relies on cooperation. Markets rely on trust. Communities rely on contribution. Families rely on shared responsibility. Removing cooperation from the equation does not create empowerment, it creates fragility. Women facing financial and emotional pressure today are not weak. They are responding to a mismatch between expectation and reality. The promise was that education and employment alone would guarantee security. The reality is that security requires redundancy. It requires shared risk. It requires buffers that single individuals rarely possess indefinitely. Men who stepped back were not rejecting responsibility, they were rejecting asymmetry, responsibility without authority, contribution without appreciation, effort without respect. Over time, that combination erodes motivation. When motivation disappears, participation follows. This is where resentment becomes dangerous. Resentment distorts perception. It turns caution into hostility and disagreement into opposition. Both sides become defensive. Defensiveness prevents listening. Without listening, no recalibration can occur. The path forward requires separating identity from ideology. Many people tied their sense of self to narratives about independence, power, or resistance. When those narratives fail, it feels personal. But adjusting beliefs does not erase identity. It strengthens it by aligning it with reality. Another necessary shift is moving away from public validation as a substitute for private stability. Online affirmation feels rewarding in the moment, but it cannot replace structural support. Likes do not reduce rent. Sympathy does not create savings. Visibility does not equal security. This is not an argument against expression, it is an argument for balance. Sharing experiences has value, but it must be paired with action. Otherwise, it becomes a loop that releases emotion without resolving cause. Men found relief by stepping outside this loop. They reduced exposure to constant evaluation and comparison. They focused on tangible outcomes rather than external approval. This shift brought clarity. Clarity brought calm. Calm became non negotiable. Women can achieve the same calm, but it requires changing strategy, not doubling down on image. It requires prioritizing sustainability over appearance. It requires building systems rather than defending narratives. One of the most practical changes involves expectations around partnership. Partnership is not a rescue plan, nor is it a power struggle. It is a collaboration. Each person brings something that strengthens the whole. When that balance is absent, the partnership fails regardless of intention. Reframing partnership as collaboration removes the language of debt and entitlement. It replaces it with contribution and choice. Choice creates dignity. Dignity creates stability. Men are not opposed to partnership, they are opposed to imbalance. When cooperation is mutual, effort increases naturally. When it is coerced or assumed, effort declines. Another critical area is financial literacy and planning. Many people were encouraged to focus on earning without being taught how to preserve or multiply resources. Income without strategy creates vulnerability. Strategy without income creates stagnation. Both are required. This is why long term thinking matters. Short term comfort often undermines long term security. The culture of immediacy trained people to prioritize now over later. Reversing that conditioning takes time and discipline. Men who simplified their lives gained control over time and money. That control created optionality. Optionality reduces anxiety. Anxiety reduction improves decision making. This feedback loop is powerful. Women can build the same loop by reassessing spending, redefining needs, and focusing on resilience rather than presentation. This is not about deprivation. It is about alignment, alignment between income and lifestyle, between values and behavior, between belief and reality. When alignment exists, stress decreases even if circumstances remain challenging. Another shift involves emotional expectations. Expecting constant affirmation from external sources is exhausting for everyone involved. Healthy relationships include reassurance, but they are not sustained by it. They are sustained by trust and shared effort. Trust grows when actions match words, when promises are realistic, when boundaries are respected. These elements were often overshadowed by performance and symbolism. Recenter them, and relationships stabilize. The broader culture will not change overnight. Institutions move slowly. Narratives lag behind reality, but individuals can adjust immediately. And as enough individuals adjust, norms follow. This adjustment will feel uncomfortable at first because it goes against years of conditioning. Letting go of performative strength feels like weakness until the relief sets in. Letting go of rigid independence feels like failure until stability appears. Men walking away created a vacuum. Vacuums demand recalibration. Either something new fills the space or systems collapse inward. That is where we are now. Filling that space does not require returning to old models unchanged. It requires building new ones grounded in realism. Models where cooperation is voluntary, where contribution is visible, where respect is mutual. The people who succeed in this environment will not be the loudest. They will be the most adaptable. They will focus on building quietly rather than arguing publicly. They will measure success by stability rather than applause. This shift is already happening beneath the surface. Small communities, private partnerships, quiet planning. These do not trend, but they endure. The tension we are witnessing is the sound of old assumptions breaking. That sound is unsettling, but it is also informative. It tells us where pressure has been ignored for too long. Listening to that signal rather than silencing it is the difference between decline and renewal. Renewal does not mean everything becomes easy, it means effort produces results again. Effort producing results is the foundation of motivation. Without it, people disengage. With it, they invest. Men disengaged when effort stopped producing respect. Women are disengaging when effort stops producing security. The solution is not blame. It is recalibration. Recalibration begins with acknowledging limits. Limits are not failures, they are boundaries that guide sustainable behavior. Ignoring limits leads to collapse. Respecting them leads to longevity. This moment offers a choice. Continue defending stories that no longer work or build systems that do. Continue demanding validation or create value. Continue clinging to appearance or pursue stability. None of these choices are easy, but one set leads to peace and the other leads to perpetual conflict. The future will favor those who choose peace through realism rather than pride through denial. Those who can say, this did not work, so I will try something else. That flexibility is strength. As more people adopt this mindset, the narrative will shift organically, not because anyone declared it, but because results demanded it. We are not witnessing the end of cooperation. We are witnessing the end of unexamined assumptions. What replaces them will define the next generation. When people talk about rebuilding, they often imagine dramatic shifts or sweeping reforms, but real rebuilding rarely looks like that. It happens through small, disciplined changes that compound over time. It happens when individuals stop waiting for permission and start adjusting their behavior to match reality. This is not glamorous work, and it does not offer instant gratification, which is why so many avoid it. But it is the only work that produces stability. One of the most important adjustments involves redefining success. For a long time, success was marketed as visibility, comfort, and constant upward motion. If you appeared confident, busy, and socially validated, you were considered successful, even if your foundation was weak. That definition is collapsing under pressure. Success is being redefined quietly as sustainability, predictability, and peace of mind. People are realizing that what looks impressive often costs more than it delivers. This realization hits hardest for those who built their identity around appearance rather than structure. When the external validation fades, there is nothing left to lean on. That moment feels like loss, but it is actually an opportunity. It forces a reassessment that should have happened earlier. It asks a simple question that cannot be avoided forever. What actually supports your life when things get difficult? Men who stepped away from traditional paths often answered that question earlier than most. They discovered that fewer obligations meant fewer points of failure. That simplifying did not make life perfect, but it made it manageable. Manageable is underrated. Manageable means you can recover from setbacks. It means one mistake does not end everything. Women now confronting financial strain are being asked the same question, whether they want to face it or not. What supports your life when income fluctuates, when costs rise, when systems fail to deliver what they promised? Answering that question honestly requires letting go of pride. Pride delays solutions. Another critical area of adjustment is expectations around fairness. Many people confuse fairness with symmetry, but fairness is not about equal inputs. It is about equitable outcomes based on contribution and capacity. When fairness is misunderstood, resentment grows on all sides. People feel exploited or underappreciated, even when effort is being made. Partnerships fail when fairness is assumed rather than negotiated. Assumptions create silent contracts that are never discussed and therefore never fulfilled. When those contracts break, both sides feel wronged. Clear expectations prevent this. They require uncomfortable conversations, but they save years of frustration. The modern environment discouraged those conversations. It rewarded confidence over clarity. People were taught to assert rather than discuss. That approach works poorly when stakes are high. Rebuilding requires relearning how to communicate honestly without framing everything as a power struggle. Men learned to disengage from conversations that felt adversarial rather than cooperative. They stopped explaining themselves because explanation often led to dismissal. Silence became easier than defense. Over time, silence became habit. Women often interpreted that silence as indifference or avoidance rather than self protection. This misinterpretation widened the gap. Without shared language, both sides filled in the blanks with assumptions. Those assumptions hardened into beliefs. Breaking the cycle requires slowing down interactions. It requires replacing slogans with specifics. What do you need? What can you offer? What does balance look like in practice? These questions are unexciting, but they are effective. Another overlooked factor is time horizon. Many people were encouraged to optimize for short term satisfaction, experiences over savings, flexibility over planning. While this approach feels liberating early on, it becomes restrictive later. Without reserves, options shrink. Men who prioritize reserves gained leverage over their own lives. Not leverage over others, but leverage over circumstance. They could say no when something felt wrong. They could wait instead of rushing into decisions. That patience is powerful. Women who are now feeling squeezed often lack that same buffer, not because they are irresponsible, but because the system encouraged consumption over preservation. Reversing that pattern takes time and discipline, but it is possible. This is where education matters, not in the abstract sense, but in practical application. Knowing how to budget, plan, invest, and reduce risk is not optional in an unstable environment. It is foundational. Those skills were underemphasized in favor of ideological messaging. That imbalance is now evident. The emotional side of the shift cannot be ignored. Letting go of expectations creates grief. Grief for the life you thought you were building. Grief for the promises you believed. Grief for the support you assumed would always be there. This grief is real and valid. Pretending otherwise only delays healing. Men experienced this grief earlier when they realized that their contributions were undervalued. They processed it privately and adjusted behavior. Women are experiencing it now as systems fail to provide the security they expected. Both experiences are part of the same transition. The danger is allowing grief to turn into bitterness, and bitterness freezes growth. It locks people into narratives that justify pain rather than resolve it. Processing grief requires acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approval, it means recognizing reality as it is. Once acceptance occurs, agency returns. You can make choices again. You can prioritize stability. You can seek partnerships based on alignment rather than expectation. You can build systems that serve you instead of performing for approval. This is where the conversation shifts from blame to responsibility. Responsibility is empowering because it restores control. Blame externalizes control and creates helplessness. Many people prefer blame because it protects ego, but it costs freedom. Men reclaim freedom by taking responsibility for their peace. They decided what they would and would not tolerate. They stopped participating in dynamics that drained them. That clarity is transferable. Women can reclaim the same freedom by taking responsibility for their security. That means making difficult choices, downsizing when necessary, learning new skills, letting go of appearances that no longer serve. These choices are uncomfortable, but they are effective. Society often resists these changes because they do not fit the narrative of effortless empowerment. Effort is not fashionable. Discipline is not viral, but both are required for lasting stability. As more individuals make these adjustments, collective behavior will change. Markets will respond. Social norms will adapt. But waiting for that shift before acting is a mistake. Early adopters benefit the most. Men who walked away early found peace sooner. Women who adjust expectations early will find stability sooner. Delay only increases cost. The idea that anyone is entitled to another person's time, resources, or effort is quietly dissolving. Entitlement does not survive scarcity. Scarcity forces negotiation. Negotiation requires respect. Respect grows when contribution is visible and appreciated. When both sides feel seen, effort increases. When effort increases, outcomes improve. This cycle is simple, but it requires humility to initiate. Another important adjustment involves separating self worth from economic output. Many people tied their value to job titles, income, or lifestyle. When those markers fluctuate, identity suffers. Building self worth on character, competence, and reliability provides resilience. Men often did this out of necessity. Without external validation, they learned to anchor identity internally. Women were often encouraged to anchor identity externally. Rebalancing this dynamic is part of the current transition. Internal validation does not mean isolation, it means not requiring constant affirmation to function. It allows for healthier relationships because need does not drive interaction. Choice does. Choice changes everything. When you choose partnership rather than needing it, the dynamic shifts. Power struggles disappear. Cooperation becomes genuine. Stability increases. This is why the future will favor those who can stand alone but prefer not to. Independence as capability, not as ideology. Interdependence as strategy, not as obligation. The loudest voices will continue to argue extremes, complete autonomy or complete dependency, total rejection or total submission. These extremes attract attention but solve nothing. Most people will quietly move toward the middle. The middle is where trade offs are acknowledged, where expectations are negotiated, where effort is mutual, where peace is valued over performance. This movement toward the middle will not be celebrated publicly. It will not generate headlines, but it will produce results, and results change culture faster than rhetoric ever could. As this shift continues, those who cling to outdated narratives will feel increasingly frustrated. They will accuse others of abandoning ideals or betraying progress. But progress is not measured by loyalty to ideas. It is measured by outcomes. Outcomes do not lie. They reveal what works, they expose what fails, they demand adaptation. When everything is stripped down, when the noise fades and the argument's quiet, what remains is a simple truth that people have tried to outrun for a very long time. Life is not sustained by slogans. It is sustained by structure. It is sustained by cooperation, responsibility, and realistic expectations. Every society that forgets this lesson eventually has to relearn it the hard way. And that is the stage we are in right now. What we are witnessing is not a sudden failure of individuals, but a slow unraveling of stories that promised more than they could deliver. People were told that independence alone was enough, that confidence could replace planning, that identity could replace infrastructure. For a time, it seemed to work because the system still had momentum. But momentum runs out. When it does, reality steps in without apology. The reason this moment feels so uncomfortable is because it exposes gaps that were hidden by convenience. As long as support was quietly available, as long as resources flowed easily, as long as effort could be absorbed without acknowledgement, the system appeared stable. Once those supports weakened, the cracks became impossible to ignore. And now, many are facing those cracks alone. Men responded to the shift by withdrawing early, not because they hated connection, but because they recognized imbalance. They realized that continuing to invest in systems that did not return value was unsustainable. They chose peace over performance. They chose clarity over chaos. That choice changed them. And once changed, they could not easily be convinced to go backward. Women are now being forced to confront a different reality, not because they failed, but because the environment changed. Costs rose, jobs shifted, support systems weakened. The promise that independence alone would guarantee stability is being tested, and for many, it is failing. This realization is painful, not because it reveals weakness, but because it contradicts what was taught with certainty. There is no shame in recognizing that some ideas were incomplete. Growth demands revision. Every advancement in human history required people to admit that previous models had limits. Refusing to do so does not preserve dignity, it prolongs struggle. The temptation at this stage is to look for villains, to assign blame, to simplify a complex transition into a moral battle. That impulse is understandable, but it is destructive. Blame does not rebuild, it distracts. It drains energy that could be used to adapt. Adaptation is the only real answer, not ideological adaptation, but practical adaptation, adjusting expectations to match reality, adjusting behavior to match outcomes, adjusting priorities to match long term stability rather than short term validation. The people who succeed in this next chapter will not be the ones who argue the loudest. They will be the ones who quietly restructure their lives. They will reduce unnecessary expenses. They will build reserves. They will seek partnerships based on mutual contribution rather than assumption. They will value peace over applause. This process does not require abandoning ambition or progress, it requires grounding them. Ambition without foundation collapses. Progress without sustainability reverses. What endures is balance, balance between independence and cooperation, balance between self respect and humility, balance between desire and discipline. These balances were dismissed as outdated or limiting, but they are the reason previous systems function as long as they did. Men walking away revealed a truth that many did not want to face. Cooperation cannot be forced, it can only be chosen. Once people realize they have a choice, dynamics change permanently. That choice cannot be undone by pressure or shame. It can only be influenced by improvement. If partnership is to return in meaningful numbers, it will not be because people are guilted into it. It will be because the conditions make sense again. Because effort is valued, because respect is mutual, because expectations are realistic, because contribution flows both ways. Women who are struggling today are not broken. They are early indicators. They are experiencing the consequences of structural changes before the conversation has caught up. Their experiences matter. not as spectacle, but as data. Ignoring that data delays solutions. Men who have disengaged are not lost. They are adapting. Many are building quieter, more controlled lives. They are prioritizing health, financial stability, and mental clarity. They are no longer chasing roles that offer responsibility without reward. That clarity will not disappear. The future will belong to those who can integrate these lessons without resentment. Those who can say, this did not work the way we were told, so we will build something that does. That mindset is not cynical, it is mature. Maturity is unpopular in loud cultures because it does not entertain, it does not provoke outrage, it does not generate instant validation, but it produces results, and results reshape reality. As this recalibration continues, some will resist until the very end. They will cling to narratives that protect ego but undermine stability. They will wait for rescue that never comes. They will demand solutions without contributing to them. That path leads to frustration. Others will adjust quietly, practically. They will accept limits. They will build within them. They will form partnerships that are chosen, not demanded. They will find peace, not because life becomes easy, but because it becomes manageable. Was not a message of despair. It is a message of responsibility. Responsibility returns control to the individual. It allows you to act rather than react, to plan rather than perform, to build rather than complain. And the world does not owe anyone comfort, but it rewards competence. It rewards adaptability. It rewards those who can align expectation with reality. That alignment is the difference between surviving and stabilizing. If there is one lesson to carry forward, it is this: independence without resilience is fragile. Cooperation without balance is unstable. Only when both are present does life become sustainable. We are watching a cultural correction unfold. It is uneven, it is uncomfortable, but it is necessary. The systems that emerge on the other side will be quieter, more selective, and more grounded. They will not serve everyone equally, but they will serve those willing to meet reality where it is. Men who walked away did not end society. They exposed what was being held together by unspoken effort. Women who are struggling are not evidence of failure. They are evidence that the old story no longer fits the world as it is. What comes next is not a return to the past, but a movement forward with clear eyes. Fewer illusions, more responsibility, more realism, less noise. And that is why these conversations matter, not to attack, not to shame, but to clarify and to name what is happening so people can adjust before the cost becomes unbearable. Now, I want to hear from you. What did you think about what was discussed here? Do you agree with this perspective or do you see it differently? Leave a comment and share your thoughts because these conversations only move forward when people engage honestly. Like the video, if you like it, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like the video, share the video. And just remember that all roads lead to MBA, men walking away, and cheers.
Nothing says you care like crypto. Nothing can compare. Nothing says you care like crypto. Oh, nothing can compare to crypto.